Okay. I think we'll go ahead and begin since it's 5 minutes since we started. Okay. And then whoever logs on, then we'll just
admit them gradually. Yeah, sounds good.
Hi everyone. Welcome to our React program online event, discussions on archive, memory, and belonging with our current React artist, Zain Ashraf. My name is Michelle Brito. I'm the program manager and curator for the React program. For those of you who haven't heard of the React program, it's been established by the P21 Gallery in order to support emerging artists and students whose work is dedicated to or inspired by the Middle East and Arab world by providing a space within our gallery and now online for an artistic intervention. So I'm going to introduce to you the artist, Zain Ashraf. Zain was born in Jordan and raised in the UAE. Zain is a London-based Palestinian researcher, designer, and postgraduate architect student at the Royal College of Art. She obtained her Part 1 qualification in architecture from the University of Edinburgh in 2019. Zain's online exhibition, The Image as an Archive, is online now at P21 Gallery and available for view until the 3rd of July. So this very timely and riveting exhibition comprises of a partial architectural reconstruction of the now absent territory in the north of Jaffa called Al Manshia. So for tonight's event, she'll present a little bit of background on her project and history around, the current exhibition, including methods, context, and intentions of the project. So we'll also engage in a discussion and Q&A after her presentation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or stick around till the very end. And then we'll have a more informal chat with the artist if you're interested. So now I'll go ahead and pass it over to Zain Ashraf. Again, if you're just joining us, please feel free to just mute yourselves. And Zain, we'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Michelle, for this thorough introduction. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you who joined us tonight for this presentation. And I feel absolutely privileged to be running this event. And for those who haven't gotten the chance to see the virtual exhibition yet, the Image as an Archive is a design project that I began developing at the Royal College of Art. And I submitted it to the P21 Gallery through an open call for a solo virtual exhibition. So this presentation will hopefully shed light on the intent and some of the design processes and decisions that I made as a measure to create or actualize my own Palestinian archive. So without further ado, let's begin this presentation. Just give me one sec. Stop this video.
Unbeknownst to the reclining sunbather at the Charles Clore Beach Park, or the brainwashed tourist at the Etzel Museum, is the necropolis of Al Manshia that sits uncomfortably beneath Jaffa's grass carpets. Below the seemingly nonchalant seafront, A jagged topography of rubble dunes echoes the cacophonies of antagonistic mouse holing, punitive demolitions, and the residual terror hereafter. Smothered by parking lots, hotels, and recreational festoons, the unbridled bride of the Mediterranean Sea is now diminished to an absentee of her own gracious ceremony, her most esteemed graces hijacked by the Zionist aspirations of the tabula rasa and commercial real estate. Al-Manshiyah makes up one of several urban arenas in Jaffa, Tel Aviv, and was not the only one to face demolition and real aestheticization. Nevertheless, this long-forgotten neighborhood best represents some of the most violent practices of spatial and cultural annihilation in Palestine. The perceived inconvenience of Al-Manshiyah's 1948 warfare damages was insensitively deployed by Tel Aviv's leadership as a moral alibi for its civilian demolition. This convincingly sanctioned the clearance of large tracts of primarily well-built and undamaged structures throughout the 1940s and late 1960s. The neighborhood's obliterated urban fabric was subsequently reinscribed with expansive public beach parks, tranquil hotels, and sporadic parking lots between the 1980s and the present day. Derivative of the Palestinian Nakba of May 15, 1948, the project's definition of catastrophe stems from the Zionist discursive erasures of Al-Manshiyah's infrastructure, land, and culture. And much like the polymorphous urban scars of Al-Manshiyah, there is an evident fragmentation of archival material in the Palestinian discourse on the contested territory between Jaffa and Tel Aviv. To confront the erasure of Al-Manshiyah's Arab urbanity, the Images and Archive was founded as an architectural practice that attempts to virtually reconstruct the most relevant aspects of this now absent neighborhood. This project therefore understands the archive as a decolonizing initiative to render visible what has purposely been made invisible under the Zionist occupation. Taking precedence from Inez Wiseman's documentary architecture practice and its elaborate digital reporting methods, this project aims to problematize the erasure of the Palestinian vernacular from the regional to the material scale. The first phase of the project confronts place annihilation in urban research through a clinical study of Al-Manshiyah's history and territory. The forensic and journalistic efforts of the stage draw on a wealth of fragmented archival research, ranging from ordnance surveys of Al-Manshiyah in British and Israeli archives, to personal testimonies collected from interviews, memoirs, and documentaries. Throughout the initial months of investigation, the hidden militarized spatialities of urban planning in Al-Manshiyah were closely dissected and remapped, using multiple city plans and aerial images from 1918 to the present day. By remapping instances of place annihilation, I have subsequently curated a range of 6 illustrative tales from 6 critical time periods: 1918, 1936, 1949, 1967, 1980, and the present day. Collectively, these city maps provide territorial readings of Al-Manshiyah before and during the Zionist occupation. Delving further into Al-Manshiyah streets, the second investigative practice offers a partial architectural reconstruction of this now absent neighborhood. Cross-referencing rare imagery from Hebrew websites and long-distance interview transcripts made it feasible to produce detailed digital models of 3 critical typologies: the market, the mansion, and the generic Palestinian dwelling before the Israeli occupation. These 3 subcategories were not reconstructed for their iconicity, but rather for the narrative potential of their vernacular components. These forensic exercises mark a drastic shift from a clinical study of territorial and urban evolutions to the architectural details of these now demolished structures. Moreover, to reconstruct a generic vernacular dwelling in Al-Manshiyah, I have conducted a long-distance interview with one of its former residents, Dr. Ahmed Sharkas. I was first introduced to him through my mother's Yafa Society contacts in Amman, Jordan. Following her introduction to Dr. Sherkas in December 2019, I sent him focused questions using a series of WhatsApp voice notes and messages. Throughout the ensuing months, I received and translated his responses sporadically with my mother's support. Born less than 10 years prior to the State of Israel's establishment, Dr. Sherkas contributed an intimate account of domestic practices in his childhood home and its surrounding locality. Through our long-distance dialogues, I was able to gather extensive knowledge regarding the programmatic, spatial, material, and cultural principles of his Arabo-Islamic dwelling. In the process of reconstruction, I occasionally sought clarification from my mother regarding some of the uncertainties that I had faced in translating his schematic annotations, as well as confirmations on the accuracies of my digital reconstructions from cultural and iconographic standpoints. I, therefore, attribute the success of this reconstruction to my fruitful dialogues with both Dr. Sherkas and my mother. Central to the project was a reenactment of El-Manshiya's vernacular material culture at the neighborhood scale. This drawing digitally reenacts the most crucial domestic and commercial typologies of El-Manshiya in the form of a condensed elevation. Grounded in street-level interactions, it not only fosters typical Arabo-Islamic design prototypes like window grills and traditional shop fronts, but also domestic furniture that was characteristic of pre-Nakba Palestine. Further to this, the third and concluding practice charts an alternative territory by framing the most up-close and personal moments of a once thriving Palestinian neighborhood. Whether it is to showcase the intricate screening system of a traditional mashrabiyya window, or to reenact a sequence of domestic rituals, the production of frames using the Lumion 10 rendering engine serves to keep alive Palestinian traditions that were commonly practiced in El-Manshiya. These accounts not only corroborate definitive evidence of El-Manshiya's existence, but also function to conjure up valuable sociocultural interactions that constituted Palestinians' daily lives before the 1948 Nakba, the sharing of meals, housing, and market errands. In doing so, the Images and Archive enables its audience to experience the neighborhood's vernacular past through contemporary modes of visualization. By restoring the Palestinian collective memory in El-Manshiya's urbanity, this project wishes to challenge its erasures that were sanctioned under the Israeli occupation throughout the 1940s and 1960s. In these reconstructions, a persistent and unforgettable trace of a seemingly untraceable neighborhood is carefully materialized through archival and architectural tools. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd also like to thank all of you for listening to it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Zain, for the presentation. So now we're going to go into a short conversational Q&A session. And so again, feel free to the audience as Zain and I discuss the project to pop in any questions you have on the chat. And as we're going along, I'll go ahead and answer anything you have. So again, thank you, Zain. That was a great presentation. Obviously,
thank you.
It's very detailed and very full of history and information. So I hope, everyone was able to catch, everything you said. And I'd like to just begin by, chatting a bit about the inspiration for the Images and Archive and how it came about as an idea before, all the physical technical process began. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So I stumbled across this project by chance. It was because I entered into a particular unit in my postgraduate course called Designing Architecture, Landscapes, and Cities in the Face of Catastrophe. And when I thought of catastrophe, I thought of my homeland, not just the infrastructural demise that it faced, but also the cultural catastrophe of losing history, losing land, and losing culture. And then digging deeper into my familial roots, I came across El-Manshiya as home to my paternal great-grandparents. And upon looking into that neighborhood, I was actually fascinated, not by its vernacular architecture, or not only by its vernacular architecture, but more so the fragmentation of archival material. And there was so much potential to be able to piece together a virtual narrative from these nitpicks, these pieces of information, whether they were maps, aerial images, whether they were testimony. So that was really how I came to this unit and how I was introduced to Manshia, and the rest was history. So hopefully that answered your first question.
Yeah, so I think, so again, from the inspiration to actually creating Al-Manshia, recreating actually technically, was there a particular, kind of technology that you relied upon, or is there, anything technical that you can explain to us that aren't, architectural experts, or maybe there's a bunch in the crowd, but, can you talk to us a little bit about the technical process about recreating Al-Manshia?
Of course. So following all of that extensive data collection, I used so many different programs interchangeably. I used drafting software to illustrate these maps. I used digital modeling software like Revit and Rhino, the ones that architects or architecture students usually deploy. And to be able to materialize all of this information, as you can see in the renders, I used the Lumion 10 rendering engine to really bring those details that were reconstructed to life. So it was using so many software to document it, to curate it, but really these were the main softwares that I went back and forth through for this process.
Great. I think Ali has a question.
Of course. Is it in the chat? Oh, hi, Ali.
Hi. No, I wanted to ask in person. I have to. So,
of course.
We studied undergrad together. But I just found out, it's great to see what you're doing now. It's great to just generally catch up in this way. What I was going to say was, I just found out now that you are actually Palestinian. And so it's really, there's something really powerful about projects that have that sort of story behind them. That power has really come through in your work. It's really beautiful. It's really interesting. But I just want to push back on something. I know you won't mind. I don't mean, I don't want it to sound harsh. It's just a pushback. So this is reconstructing archival work. You could almost argue, I can understand maybe there's a need to just not forget where you come from, especially when it's particularly under attack in lots of ways that we all know about. But I just want to, so what is to stop someone? I mean, imagine seeing it as this is reconstructing material that exists. It's giving us a new way to understand it, to experience. But is this more than just telling the narrative? Is it more than just, I mean, it could be about, this is what we've lost, and it's very important to archive things before they're, if we see ourselves losing them. But can it do more? Is there anything else? For example, can it really teach us lessons about how to make sure that we don't, as much as people who are living there can do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Does it imply that we change the way we build, for example, as an example? Or what else can it do beyond, the reconstruction? But this is, it's beautiful what you're doing. I'm just pushing back as a critic. But yeah,
of course.
Nice to meet you.
So first of all, that's a loaded question. It's a great question. And I think there's so many ways to answer it. The first thing that comes to mind is, at least for me as a Palestinian, to come up with different technologies and ways to experience the vernacular in a number of ways, a number of angles. So it becomes a tool, the image becoming an archive, all these images collectively making history, as well as involving the older generations, having grandchildren talk to their grandparents, their grandparents. I felt the most connected to my family when I was doing that, whether it was translating Arabic to English, whether it was finding interviewees. It becomes this collaborative archival process that involves so many multi-generational discussions. It was also, for me, a mode of education, looking at for example, the Mashrabiyya screening systems as a protective measure, having a very interiorized domestic architecture, looking at awnings. So there are so many different pieces, these little fragments that when come together, they form an archive. And then in another jurisdiction and another time, a new archive. So it's a very experimental, it's an emerging different medium that I'm really, really excited about. So I hope this answers your question to some extent. We can go on and on about it. And because we're short on time, we're not able to go further into it, but hopefully this gave you some insight into what the narrative capacity of architecture could, like what it can contribute for culture and the preservation of culture.
Thank you, Ali, for the push. We always appreciate the pushback here. Great, Zain. So moving on, I'm going to answer a couple of questions from the audience because I want them to be really engaged, and we'll come back to our questions as we go forward.
For sure.
But can you stop sharing your screen? I missed it.
Yeah, of course. Let me, all right.
Great.
Now we're good to go.
So we have a question from Nabia Kadar. She wants to know, do you think you'll take this project further? Interested to see where you will go with it. Wow, how long did that whole fabrication process take? She asked a lot of me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So in terms of the potential for the future, I'm actually really excited about making the image as an archive, as a brand. I know it's a little early in the making, but it's also looking at different jurisdictions, being able to form a team in terms of talking to interviewees, then creating this database. So when you are communicating with interviewees who lost their homes, we are able to more meticulously achieve a reconstruction that is true to the time. So this is an emerging practice, of course, and I'd love to take it forward. And I'd love to, end it with Menshia here and then look at other cities around Palestine, coastal cities, rural cities. So that's definitely one of my greatest goals. And as for the technology, it was a very exhaustive process, of course. It took, sometimes there were moments of doubt when I wasn't so sure, but it was really through my mother and through my interviewee that I had faith in myself and had faith in, the quality of the reconstruction. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nabia. We have another questions from Mervat. What was the most challenging aspect of the research and what was the most rewarding for you?
I think the most challenging aspect is, as you know, because there was this fragmentation of archival material and so many uncertainties, it was really up to me to do it justice. So I had to work very creatively. But I think, by the same token, I do believe that this was a rewarding challenge because it taught me to delve deeper, to look at different avenues that are not so conventional, looking at different languages. It was like a combination of Hebrew and English and Arabic. Also looking for support from both Israeli and Palestinian researchers who had the extensive knowledge of Palestinian architecture. So I think the challenge became the reward in a sense because it taught me so much about this.
Great. I just have a comment actually from Ibuka. I like that the work starts to take an identity of its own and solidifies your narrative behind the intent. Great work.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And Sanad wants to know what inspired you to choose Al Manshia for this very special project. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. So there are different layers to that. The first layer is the familial layer, finding out from my paternal side of my family that my great grandparents did briefly visit, and they grew up in Al Manshia. The second part is the catastrophic history of Al Manshia, the very complex urban layers that this neighborhood had experienced before the Zionist occupation, under the Zionist occupation, to the current state. So it became a no-brainer for me. Then I had this tunnel vision about Al Manshia, and I feel like this was one of the best decisions that I have ever made because I stuck to my roots, but at the same time, I was able to deal with the challenges of archival material and really, make it my own as much as possible.
Great. Mira asked a similar question about challenging part, but answered that. So we'll go on to Lena, who she says, I would like to thank Ms. Al-Sharaf for the amazing presentation.
Thank you, Lena.
It's not easy to work on such a sensitive topic. I believe that these elements that you emphasize are on things that have been reutilized even in the next generations abroad. I'm just wondering if there's something that interests you in the relation between different regions in Palestine and how it translates abroad.
So I think, so by different regions, is it like different regions in, different regions in Palestine. I think because if you really look at the nuances of Palestine and Palestinian cities, we come to find out that even architecturally, there are versatilities, not just because of the different generations of architecture that emerged, throughout the past few centuries, but the fact that each of them deserves its own dedication and time. So one city and neighborhood doesn't necessarily mimic the history of the others. So I think in terms of taking this practice forward, I would love to, I guess, come up with a strategy as to how I am able to capture the essence of as many, as many cities and as many exiles' homes and architectures as possible. So this is a really, really good question, and I will definitely keep thinking as to how this could become a reality. So thank you for asking me to reflect on this.
Great, and we have a question here from the brilliant Brian El Nael. She asks, my question is, how did you find it presenting this project, one that is so close and personal to you, to an audience outside of your community?
So for me, for one, it was very cathartic because I was able to confront the colonial occupation and the erasure of culture that, the Zionist occupation has really prompted for, in a way that was architecturally creative. For myself, I learned so many different skills. So it was very rewarding, very fulfilling. And I think it was absolutely amazing to see the outpouring of support and the reactions, not through my page, but also through my peers and my family. So it was a very, very humbling experience and also a very exciting experience, arguably, the closest to my heart. And hopefully I did it justice, not just to my great grandparents, but exiles who have, lost their homes, are not able to materialize it. And, maybe even taking this to a virtual reality sort of experience. Again, these are just early stages, but it definitely humbles me and it excites me. Thank you for your question.
So I'm going to go back a little bit to our discussion, Zain, because I just want to maybe incite a little bit of more background and into Palestinian architecture. So can you just talk a little bit about the main characteristics of Palestinian architecture to us, so that maybe, we can kind of understand what makes it so special in this context and why it inspired your work?
So I think as far as Manshia goes, because I can only, speak for what I was able to observe in Manshia, you could look at, the privatization of architecture. You can also look at different domestic furniture. So as you can see in this visual, it was really a combination of looking at the schematic diagram that my interviewee, Dr. Sherkes, had drawn out for me, and also a combination of different furniture, whether it was like the copper washing basin or the grills that guarded each window, or the Nabulsi soap that was, visualized, I think, in one of these images. So it was really these different fragments that made architecture interiorized, that made it humble. So you would have protective gates or, main doors. You would have a copper water pump. So pieced together, it becomes, hopefully I was able to do it justice by bringing these textures to life, by studying existing textures. And I think when it comes to the commercial typologies, this was quite exciting because I was able to look at the market signage, the awnings, the shapes of the windows. So it was stylistic, but it was also functional. And I guess the last one was Baida's Palace, which I found to be a combination of the Gothic and the Arabo-Islamic style. It was very outlandish for the time period and very luxurious, but it also tells a story about the versatility of Palestinian architecture, how it is not monotonous, it isn't always standardized, but you get almost like a catalog of different window shapes and appearances and protective screening methods. Hopefully, we could go on and on about this, but I think this is really what my observations were. And I found them to be really exciting because they taught me a lot about Manshia and its vernacular.
Okay, great. Sorry. So I have a question here from Russia, which asks, she says, first, truly a unique yet necessary exploration, especially as time is passing, will only make remembering harder. Looking back at the project with intention to carry this forward to new case studies, would you change any part of the process to simplify it or make it easier? Is there a new angle or category you would like to explore in your next studied region? Essentially, any recommendations for yourself for the next iteration of the Images in Archive?
Wow, this is an amazing question. And although it is a little early to come to conclusions about it, I think one of the things that sticks out to me is to come up with a process. You know, when interviewing prospective interviewees who are exiles from Palestine, to be able to visually communicate what I envision when they start talking about, for example, their living room, their furniture, to come up with some sort of database that I am able to work with when reconstructing these components, so I could do it with more accuracy and more efficiency and on the spot. So this is something that always sticks at the back of my mind when I think of the future. So I think this is one of the ways I could try to simplify it, make it more efficient. The next stage is to, I think when the project expands, to be able to find team members who could collaborate with this on me and find interviewees. So it becomes, as the system becomes larger and more expansive, it arguably becomes more complicated. So there's so many logistical aspects that I'd like to improve, like creating that database, finding interviewees. So there's so much to it, but hopefully this could give you a little insight into, you know, the most important things to keep in mind when expanding this forward. So thank you, Russia, for this question, and I'll definitely keep thinking about it.
Great. Thank you, Zain. Halima wants to ask a question as well. I love the link between architectural history and using modern software to reveal the city. Do you think you would expand this towards other countries, creating a global archive?
Wow. So I think it's definitely not off the table, but I personally think, like, in the immediate couple of years, there's just so much to do in Palestine that it might take precedence over it, but I'm definitely not against exploring other nations, because diaspora is something that is felt by so many different nations, so many different ancestors. So I think that is something that I'd consider, but I think what comes to mind in the immediate coming years is to stick to the Palestinian region and hopefully to see how things go in terms of allowing for, you know, other options. So thank you for that question as well.
Great. So we have a few comments, just obviously, you know, saying obviously this is a very great project, beautiful cities of Palestine, very informative.
My brother. Thank you, Sanad. I really appreciate it.
And so I think most of it is definitely, you know, very recognizing all of the hard work and the technical process of the, you know, of creating, recreating, Al Manshia. I'd like to maybe ask a little bit, I know we talked a little bit about the three distinct places, the residence, the market, and the mansion on the beach a little bit. So these places are no longer existing, is that correct?
Exactly, none of them. I mean, the majority of Manshia was demolished, with the exception of the Hassan Bek Mosque, which still sits today, and a couple of sporadic buildings. Unfortunately, all of it was demolished and subsequently converted into Zionist hotels, parking lots, parks, and so on. So completely eradicated.
Is there any part of Al Manshia that still exists or currently exists that you know, felt, you know, that you would want to maybe not recreate because it doesn't need to be, but also include in the archive?
I think down the line, I think that would be important, because we are trying to preserve as much as possible. And with Al Manshia, there is this erosion. And, you know, you could never guarantee that these buildings will still stand in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's important as of now to document what is present as much as possible, to talk about it, to educate our children and grandchildren about it. So there's this element, this urgency to preserve. And I think going back to your first question, really that's why I started the Images in Archive. There was this urgency to keep as much as possible and to make sure it's never forgotten. So thank you for that question, Michelle.
So I was a little bit interested in the market actually, because markets tend to be like this cultural hub for neighborhoods and communities. And in the images and archive, we are presented with Al Manshia's market. Can you give us a little bit of like history about the market and like a little bit of architectural details of the market? I love markets, so I just want to know if you, yeah.
So as I said, there's very little to say about the market because based on the historical records, there were very general information, but it was a cultural hub that was able to foster Jewish and Palestinian, Arab merchants. And what I was captivated most by was, how the awnings looked like, the textures, the livelihood based on the very few images that I was able to procure on that market. You could see so many elements. You could see architectural elements, you could see screening systems, you could see fruits and vegetables and unicycles. And I couldn't capture all of it, but it was the hustle and the bustle, I think, is what really kept that space alive, as well as its numerous architectural elements. And just from a stylistic standpoint and the roof shingles, I found all of these to be beautiful within themselves. And then to compound that with, how that space was it just made it more compelling for me to bring it to life. And I had so much fun, bringing in fruits and vegetables into the video. So it was so much fun for me as well.
Great. So we have a message, a voice message from Waleed, who's going to ask you
a question.
Hi, Zain. How are you?
Hi, Waleed. Thank you for joining us.
That's okay. I think this is a very sort of fantastic and creative way to preserve the Palestinian legacy. I mean, I guess I grew up in a similar situation where my mother's family was also exiled from their home. So my question is, in the short term, have you decided what your next tower that you're going to bring back to life is?
Honestly, it hasn't really crossed my mind yet, but I was looking at the village of Lubia and how it was converted into, I believe, a South African park. So perhaps that would be the next one, because I was just doing research on it, independently for another project. So perhaps that would be the next one. But, it's so overwhelming to take, Al Manshia and apply what I learned to the next jurisdiction. So perhaps the next stage, or the intermediate stage for me, is to come up with a new system or re-strategize a little as to what were the challenges for Manshia and could they apply in the same exact manner to others? What new technologies will I need? Will I start to learn VR technology so that Palestinian exiles could wear the headset and be in the room? So for me, the immediate thing is to devise the best ways to capture a neighborhood and to be experimental. And, this is really the time to do that. So thank you for your question. And I hope this answered it to some degree.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Cheers.
Thank you, Waleed.
So we have a question next from Sarah, who would like to ask a question.
Hi, Zain. First of all, congratulations on this project. It's truly amazing. I'm an architect myself. I'm half Palestinian too. So I just wanted to say something about Ali's comment in the beginning, which truly makes, of course, it makes sense. And the importance, I guess, of such a project and what you're doing as an architect, as an artist, as a historian now, is preserving memory. Because as you said, these things are incredibly important for all the people who have never been able to see pictures even. And I think you said one of your struggles is not finding proper documentation. So I don't have a question per se, but I would really like to advise you, or perhaps to go into, for example, VR in your next projects. There's a program called Unreal Engine, and probably push your project into the more exhibitions and kind of museums sector, because I'm pretty sure many of us in this chat, in this forum, would love to experience a place we've never been to and a place that was tried to be erased from memory. So thank you again, and I hope to continue to see your project. So congratulations.
Thank you, and I really, really appreciate your kind words and your suggestion. And this is definitely one of the many decisions I will make, including integrating VR. So that's a spectacular opinion. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that's, a next step or something that we can hopefully see from the Images in Archive in the future. But that I notice is something a lot of people are kind of requesting lately, like seeing this 3D experience, or, VR experience, basically, to immerse themselves in these memories, and I think that's a great idea. We have another question from Mustafa. So if you would like to ask your question, Mustafa.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you could hear me, but thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation, Zen. I really found it so fascinating. I'm just wondering, more of a logistical question. In terms of resources for your work, what do you use? Because I am familiar with Palestine Today, visualizing Palestine, some of those maps, the 1940 maps. In terms of architectural type details, how things were, photographs of old, vernaculars that you talked about, what are some resources online that you use? And a second thing I was just thinking was, would you consider putting your work almost in a sort of deep fake sort of way to kind of, so when people go and search for a particular neighborhood, instead of what's there now, your work maybe appears? I don't know if you've thought of that as a potential output. But so it's a question about resources that you've been using and also how you maybe could impinge on those resources. But thank you so much for your presentation. And I'm also just
Thank you. And thank you for your question. So off the top of my head, there's so many resources, but the one that comes to mind is the Institute of Palestinian, or the Journal of Palestinian Studies. So looking at different testimonies. Alternatively, I had a primary source who actually lived in Al-Manshia, so he was able to help me. And also, because this is a very contested neighborhood, you could find resources in Arabic and in Hebrew. So for example, the National Library of Israel has so many maps, aerial images. So I had to really go out of my way to cross-reference different websites and different languages. And because this is a really important question, I'd like to send you actually an email with some of the resources so I could do justice to this question. But off the top of my head, looking at Palestinian journals, PalestineRemembered.com, that's one that's absolutely spectacular. Talking to existing researchers like Sami Abu Shihada, I believe he's based in Jaffa, or he's done a lot of research as Zakirat, I think it's known as Zuhrat in Hebrew. That's also spectacular. So these are just popping in my mind, but I could send you a comprehensive list. As for the second half of your question, I was thinking down the line of building a website, almost like the Center of Documentary Architecture, creating some sort of digital database or system with the images of Al-Manshia cited and sourced to give credit to everybody who contributed to the archive, as well as the feature that shows my project or my take on it. Because although it is clinical, it certainly isn't fully accurate, but that's what I'm trying to work towards in further projects. So thank you, Mustafa, for asking this question, and I hope this gave you the information you needed.
Great. Is there any more questions from the audience before I ask a couple of wrap-up questions for Zain on her project? Anybody? You have a lot of comments. Brilliant work from Tariq, and a lot of really nice messages from basically everyone. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
So before we wrap up, Ali.
Just one more thing that came up at the end there was when you showed those the furniture and just the smaller things that we might forget or push to another specialist as architects we might not focus on, but I think they became very powerful and just it became easy to imagine how you would live in that house. Like when you saw the washing line, for example, you can very quickly imagine someone, taking, in the routine of, clothes washing just from things like that. Did you know that it would become, I don't know if you feel the same way, and if you do, did you know that it would become so important to gather those things, and not, because I can imagine it started out as an exercise of like walls and, windows and the construction. Did you know that the furniture would become, and the details like that would become so important as you went through the work?
So I think it definitely has been. At first, I was really looking to capture the, existing architectural details that you could see. from the images. Like I was able to gather images of the facade of this, the Red Palace, the facade, and a little bit of the entrance of the market. But for the house, I actually didn't have any photographs. So it was really up to me to give life to the house and to be able to create, the frame as an archive. The furniture became actually one of the most crucial elements because it tells a story as how these spaces were utilized, the relationship, and also visually, how did our great-grandparents experience it? Of course, it's not completely accurate, but it really helps give life, give context, give history. Like, for example, off the top of my head, I was looking at something called the Namliya, known as a cabinet, and how it was almost interpreted as a refrigerator. It was used as a refrigerator at the time. So that gave me historical information that's interlinked with the furniture and with the architecture. So I think they became absolutely pivotal. In fact, I have to admit, sometimes even more important than the walls and the windows. These became almost a backdrop. The furniture became the star of the show, if I may say that. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you very much, and it was really nice to see the work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. I have a question from Nada. If you can ask your question, please.
Hi, Zain. Your presentation was really beautiful, and I really enjoyed kind of watching it. My question is a little bit not about architecture, but more about what kind of emotions have you kind of experienced as you're remapping this entire city that you have an emotional connection to, that is completely now unreachable and kind of not there even anymore? How much was that driven by nostalgia, and how difficult is it really to kind of because sometimes it is architecture, it is beautiful drawings and all of that, but it also means so much. So if you would like to talk about that.
Of course, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a fantastic question because I think there were so many emotions, overwhelmingly positive emotions, but there was also this determination, in frustration towards, the Zionist occupation and what had been done to Al-Manshia, as well as so many existing and past depopulated Palestinian villages, this tenacity to, keep the architectural essence, to keep the cultural essence alive. So there was this determination, almost this unbridled determination that caused everyone around me to say, stop working, but it didn't bother me because I felt like this was my purpose. So in a way, it was very cathartic. It was challenging, but it was very rewarding. And to see the outpouring of responses from Palestinians and diasporics and researchers, really all sorts of people, it was really a combination of elation and determination. And so many more emotions, but really these were the leading emotions in driving that project for the past year and a half.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Nada. So before we go, Ghanem, as well as myself, kind of have one of our wrap-up questions is what long-term impact do you hope to achieve through your exploration and reconstruction of Al-Manshia, similar to my, what were the overall goals of the project and the outcomes, basically, of what you hope to achieve?
Absolutely. So I think the first outcome that comes to mind is how can we utilize these digital tools to be able to experience a space, whether it's using a particular software to experience textures, how do we capture time? So there's this logistical layer that is always at the back of my mind. The second one is data collection. How can we research it? So I'm always, at the back of my mind thinking is how can I procure interviewees? How can I reach out to them, get them to speak, get them to share their, cultural narratives and architectural narratives, and, which villages to choose. So there's so many, overarching questions. But I guess the main goal and the binding role with all of these inquiries or thoughts is to do justice to the historical context and the cultural context of the architecture that I'm trying to bring to life again, and to do it with so much cultural sensitivity. And it's not just about being meticulous, but it's also about considering that history is contested. So to be very careful with my resources. So I hope that this gives you a little bit of insight of, what the initial thought processes are. But I mean, I couldn't be happier to take this forward, and any suggestions are always welcome. So thank you for asking this question.
I have a question quickly. I don't know who it is because I can't read Arabic, but the question is, they got a little bit late, but does your research address tile making and integration of tile flooring in Al-Manshia architecture? My grandfather, Khalil Abu Shandi, had a tile making shop which provided such products alongside pipes and other cement related products.
That's incredible. I think the crucial part about this question is that it addresses materiality. So I think that, just give me a second to just reread the second part of the tile making shop, tile making and integration. So absolutely, because the material details are what make the nuances of like a place's architecture and design from a stylistic standpoint and a functional standpoint. So it did look at flooring of the market. It did look at the flooring of the courtyard of the residence that I reconstructed. But I would love to, I guess, get more research as to how specifically these tiles were. And I would love, your grandfather's insight on this if he's still here. But absolutely. But I can't say with certainty that I got it completely right, because as I said, there wasn't so much information. So I tried to, and I talked to my mother about it, and I asked researchers about it. So it's not completely accurate, but I hope that I was able to get it close to what it was really like back at that time with the vernacular.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Zain, for all of your responses. We really appreciate, all of your hard work. It's an amazing project. I urge all of you, if you haven't gone on to the Images in Archive and have just been with us for this presentation, to visit our website and visit the Images in Archive. It's online on the P21 Gallery website until the 3rd of July. And also, if you're interested, Zain will also be doing another event on the 30th of June. So another event this month in relation to the project. It's called, one second.
Our archival project.
Yeah, our archival project. Sorry, I was going to read the actual description of it, but I didn't get to it in time. But if anyone's interested in also just continuing the conversation, this event will invite anyone who's interested to come and share any objects, personal objects, and experience a collective, collectively the process of remembering via the kinds of speculative reconstruction that Zain employs in her artworks. So we'll have another event on the 30th. For anyone else that has a question or would like to, stick around for a few extra minutes, I think Zain will stick around for a bit to just answer any last minute questions. But that'll conclude our presentation and our event. So thank you, Zain. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And and thank you again just for taking your time out of your evening to join Zain. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I really, really appreciate your support and your questions.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good job. If anyone wants to stick around and ask you anything, we'll just stick around a few more minutes.
Did we cover all the questions in the chat?
In the chat, yeah, a lot of them were very just like comments. Oh no, Dr. Riyad said no.
No? Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that.
Sorry.
But thank you for sharing that, because it's a crucial part of if Riyad's still here.
I passed a question. Oh no. Sorry everyone. I was trying to whiz through all the questions, but if there's any more for Zain informally, just go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I'm actually copying all of these into a Word document so that I don't miss anything. or those who share their emails with me could always get in touch with me as could I. So just let me save that real quick.
Yeah,
and
a lot of really nice comments.
And they're all much appreciated.
You did great.
My interviewee is actually with us, Dr. Ahmed Sharka. So I'd just like to say thank you for attending this, and I really, really hope that I did justice to your, residential dwelling to the best of my abilities. So thank you for attending with us.
Hi Zain. I don't know if I can talk again. It's Sara.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Sarah.
One of the things that I think fascinate me most about architecture and about studying architecture, and this really shocks my peers, my friends, when I tell them my favorite subject is history. Because they're like, oh, it's so boring. You memorize so many things. What's the need? What's the use of it? And I think it's precisely your type of work that makes us architects kind of push a message, because of course we know that we have the job of building, of designing for the current consumer, for the people around us. But I think there's a big part of us that really needs to respond to history, to things that we no longer see, we no longer can visit. And I think a part of history is, and it's not only you, I think, just so many people have always been trying to recreate certain types of architecture, like bringing them back to life, doing drawings and things like that. And for you to be able to do such work with so limited resources and with your imagination, using your architecture senses is pretty brilliant. And I hope you can continue with it. And it's just the things that we would love to see. For me personally, I felt like one of the most important things about architecture is reviving lost places and the memory, because as you said, we need to reserve this for our children, for our grandchildren, and for generations to come. It's just it is brilliant. And I just wanted to ask you, how long did this process take you? The designing, the Rhino modeling, or Revit, the Lumion?
Of course.
It's tedious, yeah. I know. But how long did it take you, and how did you do your plan of action to get as much as done as possible?
Of course. First of all, thank you for your commentary on this and for your question. I think in terms of building it might have, I guess I lost track of time because I was working so many hours on it daily. But it took a couple of months to, first of all, the first initial months, the first 3 months were dedicated to finding the jurisdiction that I wanted to reconstruct. After we looked at the term catastrophe, what it means, and everyone picked their topic and their neighborhood or their site. And that took a couple of months, but then that was also followed by a couple of months of map making. And each of these maps, although they're really, really tiny on the screen, they're like A0 or something like that. So these took a couple of months, but they also paralleled my digital modeling through Rhino and Revit. And then the last couple of months were dedicated to using Lumion. I actually highly recommend that software because it was very easy to learn for me, and there were tutorials on it, and it rendered rather quickly. So that took a couple of months. So I think collectively it might have taken over a year and a half to piece this together, and I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. But of course, it was a very exhaustive process. And going back to your initial comment that this is a really crucial process, no matter how historically boring one could argue, doing so much research is, I think if it's in the service of something that is larger than yourself, a cause that is really important, it certainly pays off. And, I really hope that this is exactly what happened with mine. So thank you, Sarah, for this question. I really, really appreciate it.
Precisely. Thank you so much. And I learned Lumion pretty recently, and it is very fast. But of course, I haven't reached that technicality level. But I do encourage you to try Unreal Engine. I know so many people use it, but it's so immersive. And my experience with it has it's easy, it's real time, and probably if you want to move into the virtual reality and having goggles and really immersing people with sound, with people, it'll just push your project to the next level. And I hope we can see that one day. But thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the recommendation, Sarah, and for joining us tonight. Thank you.
My honor. Thank you.
Zain, we also have a question from Nadia that just wanted to find out if you would be able to send all of your resource list to everybody.
Absolutely.
You mentioned a resource list, so I wasn't sure if you were going to be sending it to everybody, but I notated her question, so then we can